I want to thank you very much for letting me give the book of Acts before Thanksgiving next week. Basically, next week, Monday or Tuesday, it'll be the book of Romans, and I'll give. This is all brought to you by Romans7.org. It's a non-profit to help the poor in spirit. Please look at our webpage, Romans7.org, and email me back for encouragement. And so I really appreciate you each week letting me give these books of the Bible I do. And I share my knowledge, what I pick up. So we'll go ahead and get started. The book of Acts of the Apostle was written by Luke. He wrote the book of Luke, and he was a physician and an artist in, they think, 63 AD. And he was on the second voyage of Apostle Paul, going from Palestine to Rome. And then he was there when Paul preached in captivity in Rome for 2 years, while Paul was still under arrest. And this book of Acts, or book of Luke, it's a major declaration preached to the Gentiles. And basically anybody who's not a Jew is a Gentile. And Acts comes from a period 35 years from the Session, where Jesus died on the cross, to the second year of Paul's imprisonment. So Luke would have saw, not saw, but he witnessed all the apostles. He witnessed different people, eyewitness to Jesus. And Luke did not meet Jesus, but he interviewed everybody. So we have a first-hand look of this, and obviously the Holy Spirit guides. And the book of Acts is a fulfillment of Jesus' promise to send the Holy Spirit to sanctify and guide his apostles in the church. And we've seen Paul go in, and so he was one of the 7 churches there. And by the resurrection and the ascension, Jesus enters on the perfect glory belonging to him, and he is proven to be the Son of God and the chosen Messiah, that Moses claimed a long time ago. And this is definitely the period of the king of Judea, Israel, Herod, Hebrew, Judea, Jesus during the Passion. And then I learned something that's really important. I didn't know that when they talk about it was a 12-hour period, the Passion was, and that's from the arrest on the Garden of Gadara to his crucifixion on Calvary. And his suffering was for the redemption of humanity through its sins. The Passion of Christ, first the 12 hours, and we witness the suffering, the crucifixion, and the death and resurrection of Jesus. And now I'll get into reading from the book of Acts. Right now I gave a historical outlook on it. And then chapter 1, verse 3, to whom also he showed himself alive after his passion. And there again, the Passion of Christ in 12 hours, by many infallible proofs that have been seen by him for over 40 days, speaking of pertaining, and after Jesus rose from the dead, he stayed around Jerusalem working with the apostles for 40 days before he ascended to heaven. So Jesus died on the cross. 3 days later, he rose from the grave, and then he stayed around 40 days where the apostles teach him. Chapter 5, verse 29, and Peter also answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. Now this is so important when you look at advertising and people's girlfriends, friends, boyfriends, husbands, whatever, And if they go against it with the commandments of God, and their men can't do it, which is so true. Chapter 7, verse 3. This is what Moses, which said unto the children of Israel, you shall hear. And this is basically 1450 BC, almost 1500 years before the birth of Jesus, where Moses gave a statement that the prophet, which is Jesus, should come up, rise up, and have come from God. So this is what the whole thing of Jesus is about, and being broken, raising on the sides 1,500 years before Jesus. And everybody, Messiah. And the next person to be martyred or murdered, if you will, after Jesus was a very special person called Stephen. They figured out that they're busy with doing the apostles, teaching the people, the teachers of Jesus. They had to find somebody who had the Spirit, who can work with family. And they elected Jesus, and then Jesus and Stephen, he was really aggressive, and the Jews seized him, and then Stephen spoke in his own defense, and then they took him out and they stoned him to death. Why this is important is that one of the persons who was watching these Jewish people, these rabbis stoning Stephen to death, was Paul, the Apostle Paul, and he was over the garments and it was Stephen. So Stephen was a wonderful man. And then Saul, who eventually changed his name, to Paul, because Jesus came to Paul and stopped him and Testament. And this all happened on the road to Damascus, Syria, with Paul. And he stayed in Syria for 3 years ministering before he returned to Jerusalem. And Herod gave up the ghost, and this is basically a king or emperor of Judea, and God dealt a saying right next to that chapter. Saying is the voice of God, not man. And this is what they told Herod, the first Agrippa. And then there again, and his grandfather was Herod, and Herod further killed Jesus, imprisoned Peter, and then of course Peter in prison. Angel came in and rescued him and brought him out of prison. And the book of Acts continues on with Paul and Silas. Book of Acts, book 16, verse 23. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, which is Paul and Silas, and cast them in prison, and then from there they thrust them in inner prisons and made their feet fast in stocks. Then Paul and Silas prayed and sang praise upon God, and the prisoners heard them. Now this is so important because here's Paul and Silas being imprisoned, being beaten with whips, in stocks, being tortured, yet they're praying and still praising God. Strong faith. And suddenly a great earthquake, so that the foundation of the prison was shaken, and made all the doors open, and everybody's basically handcuffs were loosened. And that's Paul and Silas. And then they walked out of the prison. Actually, they went talked to the prison boy, or gave him, and he got the Holy Spirit. Then Paul preached in Ephesus, 7 churches in that, 7 in Turkey. And Ephesus is a lot of people converted to Christianity. And this is when the Greek god Diana is statued in the harbor. In book 22, verse 20. And when, the beloved Stephen was dead, but basically this is talking again about Paul. He knew that he sinned when he held the garments of the Jews while Stephen was, stoned to death. Paul was arrested in Rome, shipwrecked. And one of the shipwrecks on the island, Paul had gathered bundles of sticks and laid them on the fire. There came out of the heat, fastened his hand as a pipe for a snake, a poisonous snake. And then Jesus told him that don't fear anything, food, clothing, and you won't be poisoned. And this is another prophecy that came true in the people on the island, and teach them things which concern the love of Jesus Christ, bidden him. Of course, in Rome, Paul was murdered, taken outside the city. They think cut his head off. Peter was put on the cross, and he asked to be put upside down because he wasn't worthy. So Peter and Paul got the teachings of Christianity, which eventually, through the power of God, became religion. So this is what I learned in the book of Acts, written by a very, very powerful person who was a doctor, who was an artist, who understood how to teach. So I'll see you next week, and please review our webpage, Romans7.org, and understand what we're doing, and look at it and give me tips of encouragement. And God bless, and have a good Thanksgiving, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Good for the holiday.